Hey, good morning, Oshkosh 2023 AirVenture. Great to see everybody today. This has been a packed forum all week long with great ForeFlight presentations. I'll show our continuing schedule in a moment, but for those of you who are coming back over and over again to see us talk about our product, our EFB that we are passionate about, it's great to see everybody come back again. My name is Ryan Bolander, and today we're going to be talking about the specific lens of ForeFlight. We're going to be talking about today is ForeFlight as used well by a flight instructor, or how to use ForeFlight as a flight training tool. My name is Ryan Bolander. I'm a CFI. I have been with ForeFlight for a couple of years, and prior to that, I was one of the passionate users of ForeFlight, just like many of you. I live in Chandler, Arizona. Anybody else fly around or train in the Southwest practice area, south of the Phoenix Bravo? Anybody here? All right, well, come and visit. We have a lot of flight training in that area. It's a very busy practice area, and a lot of in ForeFlight with ADS-B comes in extremely handy. My job at ForeFlight is something that I'm extremely passionate and proud about. I work specifically with our flight school customers and tangentially a lot of CFIs. So I really am in the flight training world trying to understand the needs and desires and the way that CFIs train and the way that flight schools train, and it's something that I feel very strongly and passionate about. We have over 200 flight school customers currently, all the way from Embry-Riddle to UND to Liberty, a lot of the flight schools that are here this week. So I'm having a lot of fun talking to customers and CFIs, but also our schools that are very passionate about using ForeFlight in their curriculum. So it's an exciting career that I have. I also want to mention how I got interested in flying when I was younger. In 1983, there was a movie released called The Right Stuff. Now, who has seen The Right Stuff? Yes, great to hear. I could watch The Right Stuff at any point, pick it up at any time, but I remember it was watching that movie when I was a kid about the space race, and it really inspired me to be an aviator. And that's something that now as CFIs, we are able to do that as well. So our inspiration for the next generation of aviators comes largely with us, but there's also some cool movies out there as well that can inspire us. So once again, thank you for coming, and let's dive right into a couple. Thomas Doherty is here with us today. He is someone who has been with ForeFlight a long time. He's in the education department, and he's going to help me with Q&A at the end. But a lot of you know Thomas from many Oshkoshes, and so I'm glad to have him here as well. All right, moving on to what we're going to talk about today, our flight plan. So obviously one of the questions we get from our passionate pilots is, what is new with ForeFlight? So I'm going to spend a little bit of time at the beginning of the presentation just touching on a lot of the things that our developers have been working hard, largely from feedback from you guys. So and then the one at the end is one I'm particularly excited about. So we'll talk about that. Another thing we'll do is a lot of CFIs are curious and wonder exactly the legality of using an EFB when they're training. And so there's actually an advisory circular that some of you have probably heard about, but many of you have not. So we'll touch a little bit on the highlights of the advisory circular on what the FAA stance is, or recommendations on how to use a mobile device or an EFB while in flight and flying. And then we'll also, the meat and potatoes of the presentation is we'll talk about the features of ForeFlight that really can enhance your instructing as a CFI. So there's going to be a rapid presentation. We're going to fly through a lot. We're not going to dive in individually and talk about how to access features. I'm just going to present them so you can get your mind going on different things you can use. And then I know that many of you, our users, are familiar with ForeFlight, but I'm sure there'll be some things that I talk about today that are going to really pique your interest to dive in further. All right, so electronic flight bags. So we all have a general idea of what that might be, but we're going to really just kind of talk about what an electronic flight bag is. So for many of us, when we did our own private pilot training, and even a few short years ago, this is what the desk of a student pilot looked like. They had their FAR AIM, their PHAC, they had charts, they had weather supplements, imagery, a logbook, the POH, training curriculum, ACS, spread out everywhere. I actually did my own private pilot training in this fashion. I wasn't introduced to ForeFlight until I was an instrument pilot. So this is something that can be incredibly challenging to keep track of resources and to constantly update them with through the FAA, and it's expensive. So with an EFB, we can take those resources and put them right into our mobile device. Many of you have enjoyed that feature for a while with ForeFlight, but that's something that creates an amazing efficiency in terms of your own flight training and your flying. So what is the purpose of an EFB such as ForeFlight? Well, it really helps maximize situational awareness and safety. I mean, we can all agree that when we fly with ForeFlight, we just get additional information that we would not normally get, and a wealth of information from a lot of different sources immediately at our fingertips. But something else that's incredibly important to students, and also today's generation of students who are used to the latest tech, they're used to their Apple devices, is ForeFlight and an EFB can make flight planning and flying more efficient and even enjoyable. It's a lot of fun. I remember when I was doing my cross-country flight planning on a Navlog, paper Navlog, filling out wind correction angles. It was a challenging part of flight training I don't think I was prepared for when I had my idealistic vision of my career. So now I have a debate with many DPEs and instructors in colleges and universities about the utility of using ForeFlight versus training on that method. So I'm going to talk about that specific topic in a little bit, but there's something about ForeFlight that makes it enjoyable and efficient. Okay, a little bit of legality of using an EFB. This is something that I think CFI should really be aware of and feel comfort with ultimately when they're using their EFB to teach. Okay, the FAA has an advisory circular on this, 9178. It's unlike some advisory circulars, it's not as long, so it's easy to get into, and I'm going to cover the highlights of this because obviously it relates directly to the use of an EFB such as ForeFlight. So an EFB, straight from the advisory circular, is an electronic display system intended primarily for cockpit or cabin use. Okay, great. EFB devices can display a variety of aviation data, checklists, great, navigation charts, POHs, perform basic calculations as well, calculations such as performance data and fuel calculations. So good, the FAA is on track with exactly what an EFB should be and how a pilot would intend to use it. So an EFB is designed to replace paper references traditionally carried in the cockpit, including the POH, minimum equipment lists, weight and balance calculations, aeronautical charts, and terminal procedures. So the FAA is really encompassing the range of products and resources and information sources that we need when we fly. And here's what they say. Here's what I find most interesting about the advisory circular. The advisory circular states the EFB can be used in all phases of flight operations in lieu of paper references if. So let's take a look at the ifs here. The information is the functional equivalent of the paper reference material. So if you're using a sectional that's an up-to-date sectional, that sectional needs to be accurately replicated within the EFB. And then the second point is the information used for navigation or performance planning is current, up-to-date, and valid. So here's really where an EFB, such as ForeFlight, can come in handy. We're constantly updating the charts. If you stay connected and continue to use and update, if you're packing for your flights, you're going to have the up-to-date information that is provided by the FAA. So those are really the two main considerations, that it's the functional equivalent and that it's up-to-date and accurate. And that's something where ForeFlight also is aligned with the advisory circular. They also make a statement about the PIC. The pilot in command may decide to use the EFB without operational approval. Great, we can use it. as long as they follow the guidelines within the advisory circular, specifically those two guidelines mentioned on the previous slide. So really great news about the utility and appropriateness of an EFB according to the FAA. So some key considerations, and I really like these because a lot of us at ForeFlight really are in line with these as well. And I'll talk a little bit about a couple of these in the presentation in a second. But something that is a key presentation, but not required, is have a backup. Now, obviously, maybe some things are not required, but are extremely important. Yes, have your backup, either a paper or electronic backup. Pay attention to the physical EFB and how you stow it during landing, takeoff, and the potential challenges during flight. So when I was first using my EFB, I would have it in my lap, and I would flip it up for takeoff, and I would use it. I felt it was easy to access. I could get to it. The challenge is going to rotate on one occasion. I brought the yoke back, and it bumped into my iPad, which bumped into my belt buckle, and I had to do a quick shimmy to make sure that I appropriately rotated. So that taught me a lesson. It's important to know how you stow and use your EFB in flight. Yoke mounts are great, window mounts are great, but the FAA and we believe that you really need to pay attention to how that iPad is stored and used during flight. Especially for CFIs, pay attention to your students. I also went through a phase where I used a lap board. So while that worked for a bit, I had to change and realize it wasn't the most efficient way. So don't overlook that part of training. Make your students comfortable, help them use their EFB in an appropriate and safe way when they fly. Also, if you drop it, when you drop it in an airplane, it can disappear. So again, really be sure on how you stow it. Something else that's a key consideration is make sure the display is readable, the lighting is adequate, and potential EFB failures are mitigated. I'm sure that's happened to you. It's happened to me where your iPad switches off or there's an issue. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a moment. And then train on the operational use of the EFB under the conditions of flight in which it will be used. It's not the best time to be learning about ForeFlight and diving into our awesome new features when you're in the terminal environment of an airport, listening for ATC instructions, getting ready to land. And we've all seen our students do that, diving into ForeFlight with their head down, going through ForeFlight looking for things. So make sure that you caution your students and you train them to use it appropriately. We all love that adage that the airplane is not the classroom, and that definitely applies to use and learning anything, especially ForeFlight. All right, have a backup. So each ForeFlight subscription, as many of you are aware, includes an ability to sign into 3 mobile devices. You can do 2 iPads and an iPhone. As a CFI, I've gotten comfortable. I'll often fly with my iPhone, but I'll have my iPad with me, and I'll have a battery with me, and possibly even a paper chart. So have that backup with you. Okay, so let's talk about some pieces of ForeFlight that can really help you in your flight training and help your students. So one question that we get all the time, and I have a discussion with, is when should a CFI introduce an EFB to a student? And there's different schools of thought on this. Some instructors believe that they should wait until later in instrument. A lot of instructors choose to provide ForeFlight or introduce ForeFlight to their students on day 1 of flying. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the things that ForeFlight does is it leads to an efficient and enjoyable learning experience. So I provide ForeFlight on day 1 to my students. I treat it like a system in the aircraft, and this is something that I want you to train on as you go. One thing that does is technology increases the interest and desire to learn. When I have a student, they're used to their iPad, they're used to using mobile devices, they're in them all the time. They're very comfortable in that space, and it's a comfort feature of flight training that you can provide to them. Something else, we all know how expensive flight training is, and we know that students often are tight on cash, like many people. So while ForeFlight has a cost to it annually, the cost of a ForeFlight license is often less than 1 training flight. And the expense of ForeFlight and having updated charts, everything provided by the FAA, always updated, can be a tremendous cost savings to students right off the bat. And again, one thing also is I know that many CFIs want their students to learn on paper charts. We believe that's great, and we think it's really important that there is a dual track between learning theory of flying, but also introducing an EFB at the same time. So while it's important that you teach theory, that you perhaps have them do that paper nav log so they can really understand the nuances of flying and using wind correction angles, etc., when you send them on their solo cross country, it's a great idea to have ForeFlight with them to give them that extra layer of safety. Tell them they can use their paper nav log, but if they're in a pinch or if they're nervous or if something happens, ForeFlight's going to be there to assist them as well. So something else that for our CFIs, one of the things that comes directly from the fundamentals of instruction is when we teach concepts to our students, we always want to start with simple, understandable pieces of information and then move to the complex. So for example, you can use ForeFlight in that manner as well. On the left there, we have an airport tab that many of you are familiar with. So much of that information is available and applicable to a private pilot, from METARs, which are decoded, helps them learn a METAR, to help them get information on airports, accessible, things specific to the cut of knowledge that they need. However, as your students advance through their training, the center is an approach plate or an airport diagram. Begin to introduce those functions of ForeFlight appropriate to their training. And on the right, we have a multi-view of synthetic vision and an IFR chart. Again, this is something much, much more advanced that you wouldn't use right off the bat with a new student, but then progressively introduce them to the more enriched, deeper functions of ForeFlight along with your students' progression in their flight training. So one thing that a lot of people are aware of, but some people may not know, is we have the ability to store training documents right within ForeFlight and the EFB. We come preloaded with almost everything available and applicable to flight training from the FAA. We have a ForeFlight folder in the Documents tab, and we also have an FAA folder. The FAA folder comes with updated PHAC, AFH, advisory circulars, the FAR AIM is in there. It's expose your students, let them know all the resources they have available at their fingertips that are updated and useful for their training. It'll save them a lot of money, and it will give them resources that they need to use during their flight training. Something else that is a true benefit to a flight instructor with ForeFlight is the access to nationwide charting. When I was doing ForeFlight, or when I was doing my initial flight training, I just had the Phoenix sectional. And while that was great and applicable to the area in which I was training, there wasn't an opportunity really to look at the different regions of the country, such as Washington, D.C., or different areas that have, or the Bay Area, or different nuances about sectional charts and airspace that may be in regional areas. It's likely that you're training a pilot today to be a commercial pilot, and they're going to be flying far beyond the region which you've learned. So I encourage you really to use the entire sectional chart when you're training, especially with things about airspace and other navigational considerations. Another feature that we offer is the ability to make notes and annotations directly within the EFB. Again, this is a feature that many students are already familiar with other e-readers and other electronic textbooks they're used to getting. So again, feel free to mark things up. This is also available on the approach plates and maps. I made a number of notes during my instrument training on the approaches I was using, just to give me helpful educational triggers to help me in my training. So EFB and ForeFlight is an excellent tool for teaching airspace. So a lot of us think about ForeFlight as a file and fly and debrief tool, but it's truly a great classroom tool when it comes to things like airspace. So on the left there is our profile view. That's a cross-country flight from LA all the way to New York City, something you probably won't be doing with your students, but you can give them an idea of the different airspace below and above them as they fly. You can move the slider up and down and really get a sense of the different altitudes and the different airspaces that will be affecting their flight as they go. On the right, that's our map view with also our profile feature. In a terminal environment, it's a much richer view of both a cross-section of airspace, but also a top-down as well. That's something you just cannot get with a paper chart. So we really encourage you to understand our profile view and how that can be useful in your instruction. Something else that we provide is the ability to teach atmospheric circulation, including winds and temps aloft. An amazing feature is a map layer of winds and speeds. This is available on our performance plan, so our top tier, but this feature allows you to look at any particular altitude and then get a legend and a color coding of the winds and temps and the circulation of the winds and wind speeds and temperatures across the globe. It's an incredible teaching tool, and it's also a tool I use when I'm flying commercial across the country to see exactly what the headwinds, tailwinds, or crosswinds are going to look like. So one thing that's really important to think about with an EFB, and this is really iPad related, is treat your EFB like another system on your aircraft. Teach your students to treat the EFB like a system. So systems on aircraft require pre-flight, but are often overlooked. Many of you are aware that there's a checklist tab within ForeFlight where you can download checklists to your make and model of your aircraft. We have stock aircraft for just about every training aircraft that you can imagine. We also have within ForeFlight the EFB pre-flight checklist that you can use anytime you pre-flight. So on our pre-flight checklist is to check your software. ForeFlight, make sure you have the latest version of ForeFlight. Make sure you have the latest Apple iOS version. Very, very important is check your battery. Make sure that your device is charged. Carry a spare. Make sure you're familiar with how to charge your device in air. You know, we talk about all the great things that ForeFlight can do to help you fly, but if your battery dies, your iPad goes, you're really in trouble. Make sure you have the current data. Make sure you're familiar with our pack function. That pack function is the feature that you use that updates everything along your journey after you create a flight plan. And finally, if you have additional hardware that you're using when you fly, such as an ADS-B device like Century, make sure that that battery is charged. So what's interesting to note is that everything on this list happens before you get to the airport. You need to be on Wi-Fi. So really impress upon your students that the EFB pre-flight checklist likely happens the night before you fly. So you should expect that if you're going to fly the next day, make sure everything is plugged in, make sure everything is downloaded, and make sure everything is charged, and that you have your backups ready and with you. EFB system failure. So you can do all of that and still get to the airport on a hot day in Chandler, Arizona, put your EFB or your iPad on your dash, pre-flight your plane, and next thing you know, it overheats. It's happened to me a number of times. So again, protecting that iPad from the heat as you pre-flight is incredibly important. But this is something that could be a reality to your students. So as you train them, if you see your students becoming comfortable, you'll all find that appropriate moment when you can teach an EFB failure. Do they know what to do? Can they look out the window? How do they react? It's likely that a DP at some point will likely do the same thing. We practice engine failures over and over. Also, I'd encourage you to teach EFB failures as well. Something that ForeFlight also allows is the ability to brief routes with your student. So here's a top-down look. This is something that you've created your flight within ForeFlight. You've got a route. From the top down, it looks just like it would on a sectional chart on that 2D view. But if you use our profile view, you can bring it up and realize that along that route, there's a dangerously close brush with a mountain. Again, something you can see using a profile cut of a flight plan. And it's an incredible teaching moment. So make sure you're using that feature when you're training routes with your students. Also, on a longer route or any route, you can use that globe button right within your flight plan. If you have performance, that globe button will bring to life a 3D route of your entire flight. Many of you have used this. I use it every time I fly personally, and I also use it in my training. You can play the route as you go, and you can really get a great sense of what your flight looks like even before you take off. An extremely powerful training tool for you to use with your students. Another feature that's similar to this is our 3D airports feature. Airports in 3D view probably is my favorite feature in ForeFlight, and it's also my 15-year-old son's favorite feature. He's not a pilot, but he loves to grab my iPad, tap on airports, and tap on 3D view. You can get a great view of just about every airport in the world, spin it, view in and out. There's also a night button that allows you to see what that airport would look like at night. The PAPIs actually work if you move it up and down. If you spin it, you can see you can see the amber lights of 1,000 feet left. You can see the threshold lighting. It's an incredible, incredible view of airports. This is available on our performance plan, but in my opinion, for this feature alone, it's an incredible, incredible tool to have as an instructor. Something that we can do also within ForeFlight is you can grab your Apple Pencil and you can make notes and annotations along the way. I often, when I'm getting my ATIS information, I just make a big letter right there on the map so it's right in front of me so I don't forget. You can make a note to provide your ATIS, although many of you have seen that ForeFlight is doing that for you as well. You can mark on your map and on your route when you need to switch your fuel tanks. So feel free to mark up your maps with the Apple Pencil in ForeFlight. It's a great way. You can mark it up, you can erase it, and continue to use it. It's a great canvas for really using your charts effectively. So something that a lot of schools are doing that I work with are training with electronic checklists. Not so much anymore, or there's always that paper checklist in the cockpit, but in many cases, and even as students move on to industry, into their professional career, they're going to be using electronic checklists more and more. So we encourage you as a CFI to teach them the use of electronic checklists. And right within ForeFlight, we have that feature. Taken from the POH is almost every single make and model of training aircraft. You can go into the checklist feature, you can click the plus button to create a new checklist, and then select the aircraft that you're training with. Within that feature is also the ability to make adjustments and additions and to customize that specific checklist as well. You can then use it as you go through and progressively prepare through pre-flight or other areas of flight as well. Another thing that a lot of schools are doing, but CFIs as well, is creating map overlays of training areas. This is an incredibly powerful feature that allows you to drop a map overlay directly onto an iPad. So this is a very interesting map overlay that is used by nearly every single flight school in Arizona on the left. There's a work group in Arizona that's a consortium of all the different flight schools that have representatives that meet on a regular basis. There's so many schools that are training within our environment in Arizona that this group has created a shared map layer that they share on their website that's provided to just about every freelance CFI and also the schools as well. So what now we have is additional VFR reporting points throughout that becomes a map layer directly on. So there's places like Medicine Hat or the Gap, things that are not charted, but that every single flight school in the area is using, again, in the spirit of reporting and aviation safety. It's something that is on top of every single ForeFlight map. You can select it, the waypoints appear, and you can remove it as well. On the right there is a practice regions that we did for University of North Dakota a number of years ago that really helps those pilots know exactly which region of the state or the area that they're going to be training in. It's really fun. I talked to a lot of CFIs, and they're showing me the map layers that you guys are creating. And it's essentially the sky's the limit on things that you can do to really help a map layer come to life. Something that a little more granular is when I was doing my instrument training, I had a CFI that was brilliant in understanding holds, but terrible in teaching them. Something that I thought that was, we had a napkin out, we were scribbling, we were drawing directions. It took me a long time to really grasp holds. Well, the nice thing about ForeFlight is we have the ability to build a hold right on top of a fix. You can tap on the fix, you can tap on procedure, and you can tap on hold, and then all you have to do is enter in the information to build the hold, and the hold will be built right there on ForeFlight. It's a really great way to visualize exactly the way the hold is being instructed or given to you by ATC, or just in the classroom environment. Another feature that a lot of folks are not aware is when you do your initial flight plan, you're going to be going from airport to airport. However, if you tap on that airport and go to procedure, you can build the actual traffic pattern as well. Again, something that's useful for flying when you're actually flying routes, but also in the classroom. On the left there, that's a 45-degree downwind, looks like right traffic into an airport. A great way to visualize that. On the right, we've got a teardrop, something that for a student may be very difficult to understand conceptually, but if you can draw that out or instruct ForeFlight of the traffic pattern, we'll put it on the map in a very, very conceptual and easy way to understand it. So finally, one of the things we're really excited about, and this is something we're going to get into Cloud Ahoy a little bit, is the ability to debrief using your EFB. So one thing that we can do is you can share, if you're a freelance CFI, understand that you can share your training flights between students and CFIs. We have a share button that will allow you to send that flight, their student to send that flight to you, you can send flights to them, and then you can use track logs within ForeFlight. Again, we'll talk about Cloud Ahoy in a second, because that's extremely exciting to us, but our track log that comes with ForeFlight does provide a lot of very rich information. You can review a flight, you can slide back and forth, you can look at altitudes and speeds, and it's an incredible way to display a flight. But that's sort of changed recently from what we're able to offer. So this past April, we were very, very excited to acquire Cloud Ahoy. Cloud Ahoy is now a ForeFlight company, and I encourage you to come visit us over at the booth. Cloud Ahoy has the ability to take a track log and break it down into segments, and those segments are recognized maneuvers. So your iPad knows climbs and descents, your iPad knows where you are spatially, and that is able to then use that data to recognize a maneuver. And so Cloud Ahoy's track log, now ForeFlight's track log, if you look on the left, is broken down into very specific segments. This is something that's done automatically, and this is something that's also can be done taking your track log directly from ForeFlight and importing it into Cloud Ahoy. So you just get an incredible amount of interesting information about what your flight looks like. One very compelling feature of Cloud Ahoy is Cloud Ahoy actually will score your maneuvers. If you look on the right, different pieces of the maneuver are scored, such as how much did you hold your altitude during a steep turn? What was your speed over the threshold? There's so many pieces that are identifiable data coming from Cloud Ahoy that we are then translating into useful information for a CFI. So something where it's an unparalleled view of a flight after the fact in terms of debriefing. Another feature in Cloud Ahoy is the ability to look at a 3D view of your flight. You can actually watch it from the cockpit in the HUD. If you're pulling data directly from the G1000 and importing it in, you're going to have engine information as well. Bank angles, attitude, pitch, etc. An incredibly powerful way to review flights. Something we're incredibly excited about. So this is for those of you who might be affiliated with a flight school or an organization. So when you're able to look at a flight after the fact and the detail that Cloud Ahoy is providing, obviously if you fly a maneuver and you get a very, very poor score, at some point that maneuver became unsafe. Maybe your bank angle was incredibly steep, maybe on short and final you were incredibly slow. So what can happen is that track log from an organization, we have something called PFOQA. PFOQA is a flight operations quality assurance. So this is the ability of a flight school to get a view of all of their flights. So for example, if a flight is flying appropriately, there's no cautions or issues, the flight school will not receive an alert. However, if there was an issue with the flight where there is an unsafe incident, the flight school will be notified directly from the cockpit of the aircraft. So in this view here, Cloud Ahoy will give you an aggregate of all of your school's flights over several months. In this particular case, there was 5,000 flights over a particular period of time, and just a small percentage of them had a safety incident. Well, we now have the ability to dive into those flights further and look at what types of events were occurring. Are students flying unstable approaches? Are they having problems with maneuvers in the air? As a safety officer at a school, you can really get a glimpse into the health of flight training. Incredibly, incredibly amazing stuff. So also as a CFI, going back down to this level, you have the ability to use instructor tools. A lot of times, many CFIs aren't even aware of this particular feature, but it's something that will really make your teaching and specifically your endorsing more efficient. We have instructor tools directly within ForeFlight. And with instructor tools, you're able to use a digital signature and to endorse flights using a digital signature. We also in ForeFlight have, directly from the advisory circular, all of the endorsement types. They're editable, so if you need to make amendments or if you need to make specific restrictions yourself on which specific airports you're allowing your students to fly to, you're able to do that. But an incredibly powerful way to make sure that the endorsement is available to you as a CFI and that you can then electronically endorse your students' logbooks. Another thing that we really encourage you to use electronic logbooks with your students right from day one. I know many of us have paper logbooks from prior to EFBs, and we have a lot of flights that need to be put into our logbooks. So really we encourage you to use logbook tracking on day one of your students' flying career. That's something that's going to benefit them as they go through and become a professional pilot. We have the ability to do a lot of sorting, custom fields, and a lot of functionality with electronically that you can't have with a paper logbook. So one thing that this is me, what I do specifically is I do a lot of university and flight school partnerships. One thing that we're able to offer at ForeFlight, if you're a member of a flight school, if you're a flight school administrator, is we have the ability to help you standardize ForeFlight with your CFIs and your students. Some extra functionality comes with that. We allow cloud storage, so if you're a flight school and you want to push your flight school's documents, you can have your own flight school tab right within ForeFlight where your students can access your school's training documents. Also with our flight school accounts, they're able to access aircraft profiles. So for example, UND has hundreds of aircraft. All of those profiles are pre-built within ForeFlight. So if you're a new student, you're issued ForeFlight like a textbook and you have immediate access to all of the school's aircraft. Another thing that we can do with a group account is the ability to have Jeppesen charts. So ForeFlight is a Boeing company, Jeppesen is a Boeing company, and many of you know who use Jeppesen charts when ForeFlight. We can really bring those charts to life, both in a teaching capacity and also preparing your students for the airline use. So we can integrate Jeppesen charts with your flight school as well. And also, if you're a flight school purchasing ForeFlight license in bulk, we're able to provide volume discounts on those. So if you're interested in that, that's specifically what I do within ForeFlight. So please talk to me after the show and we can share some information. So one thing that's awesome about ForeFlight that I found before I was an employee and that I learned even more so being an employee was the passionate support that we provide our pilots. We're pilots, what I explain to people that reach out to us is that we are pilots ourselves and we love the great ideas that you are getting us. So if you're a student or you're a CFI and you have a question, reach out to team@foreflight.com. Many of those amazing employees who are on the other end of that email are here this week and it will help you. But we're extremely proud of the support we provide because obviously we are incredibly passionate about ForeFlight. If you're a flight school, you can reach out to us or me directly or through sales@foreflight.com and we can help you standardize your EFB at your school with ForeFlight. And if you want to learn more about ForeFlight, we have a robust education page on our website. If you can see the QR code, you can get that or come talk to me. But on that education page, we have content for flight schools, we have content for CFIs, and also content if you're a student and you just want to learn more how ForeFlight can benefit your training. So again, thank you for coming. We really, really appreciate your use of ForeFlight. We appreciate the questions you get, the feedback, and so have a wonderful, wonderful time at AirVenture, and thank you for flying with ForeFlight.